All right, guys, welcome back to another episode of Talking with Titans. Super excited about this one. We've got a genuine pro to present to you today. Comes from the tennis world. Really excited to hear what he's got to say. So without further ado, I present Harout. How you going, mate?
Good, Christian. How are you?
Going really well, thank you. Yeah, like I said, I think when you talk to anyone about sports betting, it always creates a little bit of intrigue, but really looking forward to diving into your mind. I know a lot about your history and you've been doing this professionally for a long time. So yeah, really excited about today. We've got heaps to get into, so let's get straight into it. So, mate, tell us a bit about yourself. Where does Harout come from? What got you into betting?
Yeah, so I was kind of influenced by the whole gambling industry since I was a young kid. My dad was a poker player. My grandfather enjoyed betting on boxing. And just being around that as a young kid, you kind of have that influence, and I guess opens up curiosity, right? To kind of understand and learn more about what's going on. So I was watching my grandfather place bets on boxing, and like when I got to like 12 years old, I reached the point where I'm like, hey, like I wanna place whatever bet it is you're placing, I want to bet it too. So he always liked to bet like underdogs and stuff on boxing matches just to kind of take a long shot and have fun with it. So I remember when I turned 12 on my 12th birthday, I had gotten like money from friends, family, and I took $20 and I told my grandpa, like, hey, when you go to the sports book, can you place $20 for me too? And I remember we put $20 and the odds were like $8, and like it's just like beginner's luck, I guess. And in that first boxing match we bet on, it was a winner. So ever since then, I kind of just been around it, and obviously you just learned throughout the years and been curious about how everything works. So that's kind of how I started.
Yeah, nice. And if you're going thinking back to then and then looking back over your entire journey, was there a certain moment in time where you were like, oh yeah, like I can do this, like this? Was it something in your head that changed for you? I know some people it's a realization, an alteration in approach or just a gradual improvement. But what was it for you?
Yeah, so obviously in my early years, like when I became a teen and I wanted to kind of like 18, 19, I wanted to really get like competitive about it, right? And I opened up a few accounts and I was like, oh, I'm gonna try to, beat the NBA market or the football market. And I just, took my shot, like just like anybody else who wasn't really informed or good at making, solid logical decisions. So I kind of obviously learned the hard way. um, and just made me want to learn more. I was getting on forums online, reading books, whatever I could to just kind of uh, ignite that competitive spirit inside of me to try to understand and learn how you really win in sports betting, and took it from there. So I would just say it wasn't really like an aha moment for me. It kind of just like naturally progressed into where I started and where I am today, just from a trial and error perspective, trying new things, meeting new people, learning different concepts, and kind of bringing it all together into shaping the strategy we apply today to bet on sports.
Yeah, for sure. When you say you learned the hard way, can you elaborate on that a bit? Is it as obvious as it sounds, or
I mean, it's pretty obvious. I mean, like most people when they first start in this space, they think, okay, just because they know sports or have an opinion, they watch something, they know what players play on what team. It just you realize that now, fast forwarding many years ahead, you know that in hindsight, that's not the way it works. It's really a numbers game, and you got to make sure that you're applying yourself with the correct logic. So when I say I learned the hard way, it was just kind of not really applying the correct fundamentals, right? When it came to betting on numbers, and it was more so about like betting who you liked or where your opinion was, and kind of disregarding everything else.
Sure. And what does a week in the life of Harout look like? I understand you're married. Have you got kids?
Yeah, I've been married for a few years now, and my little one is a year and a half years old. So it's kind of trying to find the balance these days to kind of balance work and life and make sure and there for my family and stuff. But it helps to having built a team, right? Because I also run a group of traders who work within our syndicate. So I'm always just kind of spending more of my time these days and in training and developing their skill sets with everything I've learned along the years to make sure that our operation can continue moving forward regardless of my commitments from a family side of things. But my day to day, I mean, I'm still involved. I typically get on early in the mornings to kind of make sure everything is running smoothly, take a look at what our betting positions are like for the day. Make sure if the guys have any questions as part of our operation, I'm there to answer and help them out. And as the day progresses, just kind of be there and make sure we have everything we need.
Yeah, and your operation is something that's very intriguing to me, and I'm sure a lot of people, and something I want to dive into in a sec. Before we do that, just wanted to talk about sort of you personally. So you specialize in tennis, and more specifically, you do your best work on the women's side, and that's what you offer at Tip Titans. Did you always have a love for the game of tennis and discovered sports betting through that, or was it the opposite, where you sort of interested in sports betting and found your edge in tennis?
Yeah, so I was always interested in the entire sports betting market as a whole. I kind of learned how to approach, the system that we use now is kind of more of like a top-down approach. So we're looking at the market and kind of forming our own opinions on what we think is a good bet, using using good analysis of which way we think lines or markets are going to move. And that's kind of how I transitioned into doing tennis, because I was like, all right, cool. Like, this is kind of on autopilot now, right? And we know what we need to do to kind of analyze all markets in the sports betting industry. What can I do to kind of take it to the next level and see in what other ways can I provide value to our business and do things outside of what we currently do in terms of betting. So I felt like, hey, what can I do to kind of apply some of the fundamentals that I use to analyze just sports market as a whole, and which sport would that specifically resonate well with? And I just felt like women's tennis was a great fit to kind of be somewhere in that middle of, having an opinion from a qualitative side and not so much of a strong background from a quantitative side. And being somewhere in the middle, right? Because women's tennis is kind of one of those things where, keeping up with information and how players are emotionally, physically, it can kind of give you a big edge without necessarily having to have such a big quantitative background or sophisticated model. So it was something that I wanted to target specifically because of that reason, and it's just kind of grown on me over the years.
Yeah, okay. So that's interesting. So, like, I'm a big believer in needing to specialize in a certain sport, but are you sort of saying that you've basically tried to put your processes through all sorts of different sports and just found the ones that it's worked best on? Is that sort of what you're getting at?
Yeah, so from our experience, like, information is king in sports betting, right? If you have a piece of information that you think could impact the probabilities of a match, something as simple as a player taking a medical timeout in a match and for a very specific type of injury can, really put you on high alert on where a line should open up in their next match given the set of circumstances. So one-on-one sports I felt like would work much better from a qualitative aspect or perspective compared to something like a team sport where there are so many more variables involved, where maybe one particular player being slightly injured or out of form isn't necessarily going to impact the overall performance of the team. So tennis was kind of, it hit that spot for me where I felt like I could have an edge based on the angle that I wanted to approach it with, without necessarily having such a big quant background in the sport.
Yeah, right. That's incredibly interesting. I actually wanted to get you to elaborate on the quant and qualitative side of it. What if you could sort of split it up into a percentage that you use both in your strategy? Would you be able to do that?
Yeah, I mean, well, basically, when we're using a one-on-one sport, we find having like an elo-based model based on player rankings is super important, just to kind of create a baseline. But when you pair that with something where you're keeping up with market information, how a player's been doing, what their condition or their confidence level is based on their overall conditions, you can kind of find yourself coming somewhere in the middle, right? Because I don't need to necessarily come up with an absolute percentage to be able to say that, hey, player A or player B has value. But if I know where my ballpark range is, and using a simple model to kind of come up with that number, and then pairing it with a qualitative side and having all the information necessary to kind of make an informed decision, I felt has been way more effective than just either being like super quant about something and falling in love with the model, where you can be subject to risk if new information has come into the market, and then not being super in love with the qualitative side, where if you have like an opinion, you're going to disregard the numbers. So just kind of fitting somewhere in the middle, I feel, has been really effective in producing good results.
Yeah, for sure. Do you know of any successful operations in the tennis side that are like solely quant? Or is it
Yeah, I mean, I mean, being in this industry and just like running a betting operation, you meet so many people, and I've met plenty of sharp people who do tennis in different ways, different styles, and I feel like you can gain an edge in several ways, whether you're like fully more committed prospectively as a quant or a qualitative analyst. But I do know that people win, and there's many ways to kind of to skin a cat. So I have respect for all people in all dimensions. Whatever way they want to approach it is completely up to them. But I do think that there's plenty of edges in tennis, and you could kind of find your way to it in one way or another.
Yeah, for sure. So getting back to your operation, like I said, I think it's very intriguing for a lot of people. How many people are involved with it? Like when did it start? And like what are the sort of logistics involved? You touched on a little bit before, but if you could elaborate on how it works, that'd be great.
Yeah, so it was just me and my partner when we first started out. We used to be basketball teammates, me and Andrew, and we kind of both always had a passion for like sports betting, and we kind of talked about it a bit when we first started playing basketball together, and then when our team kind of dissolved, we got a little bit older or whatever. We always remembered, hey, that there's always this mutual interest in sports betting, and we kind of revisited that. And somehow, some way, he was living in Florida at the time. He wanted to come back to Vegas, and I kind of wanted to move out of my parents' house when I was like 20 years old, 21 years old. And then I kind of just we became roommates, and we decided that, hey, like let's look into the sports betting thing a little bit deeper. And we tried many different things, right? We were just kind of curious more than anything else at the time, rather than saying that, hey, we knew what we had to do to win. We were just trying different things, and we kind of came to the conclusion that whatever way we put it, one of the most important concepts to winning in sports was to kind of essentially beat markets, right? You want to get a better price than what markets are closing. You have to kind of justify you have an edge in something. So to us, it was always just about, all right, if we know that we need closing line value to win in this long term, in which ways can we approach this to kind of make that happen? And, we picked up some subscriptions to some software that would allow us to kind of see markets globally in real time. And we kind of just started our way initially, just trying to pick off like easy numbers, right, at soft sportsbooks, and kind of follow the steam and get into positions that we knew were good. And when you do that consistently enough, and you start to see results. And when the results came, our curiosity kind of expanded, and we always tried to adapt and always take it one step higher, right, and go to the next level. So we started making connections, meeting new people, people who can maybe get us account somewhere, or new places where we can bet in. And that just kind of took our operation to the next level. We started betting bigger as our bankroll was growing. And then from there, we're like, okay, it's like so many responsibilities, and we got to import our positions into some kind of a tracker and make sure we know what's going on, because things were kind of taking off really fast, and we want to make sure everything stayed organized. So we hired somebody to kind of do that for us. We call that role a trade assist now, and whoever is kind of designated to that role on a busy trading day will just be assigned to that and make sure everything that we're betting gets recorded somewhere, so that we can be aware of what we're betting, how much we're betting, and things like that. And then from that point forward, that trade assist kind of understood how betting and everything works, and he kind of promoted himself into becoming a trader. And from there, we just try to expand to more markets, learn more things. And as that happened, our operation just kind of naturally scaled itself. So that's kind of where we are now, fast forwarding, 7 years later.
Yeah, wow. That's so cool. So, and are you sort of saying, you mentioned earlier, are you sort of off the tools now, so to speak? You're more of almost like it sounds like a management role, like you're sort of guiding the new guys coming through. Is that where you sort of sit in the business now?
Yeah, so obviously my passion is in the sports betting domain, right? But it just doesn't always have to be like, I have to be the one betting. I actually found just, being passionate about the industry as a whole has made me find that same level of excitement doing it myself. As I do when I see the guys being able to apply the things that I've learned and the things that I've taught them in the same way. So seeing them being able to pick up those same concepts and apply themselves the same way I would when I'm the one trading the markets is really satisfying to see.
Yeah, that's cool. Now, that was a bit of a segue back there. I heard I was listening to you on another channel recently, and you were speaking about, it was a couple of years ago that you were talking about it, but one of the terms you kept referring to was expected value, and how to bet for value. Like I want you to elaborate on those terms. I think the word value gets thrown around a lot in this industry, but not sure whether everyone completely understands exactly what it means. So when you were saying, you learned how to bet for value, what did you mean by that?
Yeah, so value is obviously achieved by, betting something that has a higher expectancy than, what the odds are telling you the expectancy is, right? So if you just take like a simple analogy of like a coin flip, everybody knows that landing heads or tails is 50-50, and it doesn't really take much math or subjectivity. There's no subjectivity involved to say that, hey, if we get like, I don't know, 2.1 odds on heads or tails, it's clear and objective that that's value. So I know in sports it becomes a little bit more subjective, right? Markets are dynamic, there's a lot more information involved, things can change. But basically that concept with, using the coin flip analogy kind of works the same way in sports. If you think that you're getting odds that are much better than, you know, that particular event happening, then you know that you're placing is going to make money in the long run. Because if you simulate that event over and over again, yes, you may have some occurrences where you're going to lose, but majority of the time when you do win, you're going to cover those losses and more, because you're just getting paid more, right, when that bet wins, than what is actually the fair value of that thing happening. So that's kind of what that's kind of, as you know, sharp bettors, that's what we're referring to when we say, hey, we want to bet for value. It's kind of like, you know, for people who are kind of maybe more new in the sports betting space, think of it in a real world example, right? If you're shopping for like a specific kind of car, and I don't know, 20 different car dealerships are offering that same car with the same specs, same everything, you're obviously gonna purchase that car from the place that has the best price possible, right? So when we're betting in sports, it kind of works the same way. You kind of want to make yourself available to shop at all these different places and potentially buy or place a bet in the sports book that gives you the most profit of the best price, essentially. So it kind of works in that concept.
Yeah, it actually becomes less about, especially when you're reviewing, like less about whether the bet won or lost. It's more about whether you took the value, knowing that long term, if you do that more than you don't, you're going to make money. It actually doesn't matter about that specific bet, does it?
Exactly. Yes, and then even while you're trying to learn, you know, as you're kind of becoming a newbie at sports and kind of trying to graduate to the next level, even if, you know, you make a bet where one could argue that, hey, it wasn't the correct side to be betting, if you still get the best price possible on that side of the bet, it's still going to be very generous for you in terms of what the results are going to be like. Because in the times where you do lose, you're going to lose less, and in the times where you win those bets, you're going to win more. So even if you're getting into sports and you're kind of in that learning phase and you're trying to transition to the next step, just my best piece of advice is, even if you don't know so much about the marketplace as a whole right now, you can always focus on getting the best price you possibly can.
Yeah, that's great advice for people just starting out, for sure. I just wanted to get back to your team. We obviously know that this industry is, you know, highly specialized. How did you find your team, you know, and what skills were you looking for when you were doing your hiring?
Yeah, so it's interesting. The first person that we brought on, I actually knew from a previous business who had he actually had zero sports experience. The reason why I thought he would be a good candidate is because I used to own a LAN center, a gaming center, and he was actually like a competitive, like a professional esports player.
All right.
So knowing his background, I was like, oh, this guy, you know, he's quick to make reactions, right? Like he's really fast with the controls, and I was like, he'd be a perfect fit, even though he doesn't know sports. Sometimes it's not all about that, right? Because you can always teach something. I feel like there's never going to be like the perfect candidate. Someone's going to be missing something. They might know sports, but they might not have other skill sets that are important to kind of fit the role of this business or the position that we were looking to fill. So my idea was, I'd rather take somebody who kind of doesn't know much about sports right now, because I feel like it's a lot easier to kind of teach someone the right habits and paint that on a fresh canvas than it is to kind of try to erase things and get rid of bad habits that you know aren't fundamentally correct. Because let's face it, like most people who are in the sports betting space are losing bettors, and they've kind of just been, you know, led the wrong way to certain things. And in order to kind of to change that, it takes a little bit of effort. But I felt like anytime I hire somebody, I'm okay to take that shot and gamble in the aspect that, all right, this person doesn't know much about sports, but I'd rather have them have all the other skill sets, like being fast, being alert, being good at math and all these other things, and then kind of just letting them understand the intricacies of this specific, sports betting domain as we go along. So it's always just about making sure that the person kind of fits our culture. Personality is important, work ethic is important, and ironically, like, sports betting knowledge has kind of been, not at the top of the party, because we always felt like that's something we could teach.
Well, that's super interesting. Yeah. Yeah, I suppose you do have to have, like you said, you might have to have that bit of maths background. But yeah, if you've got a clean slate to work with, that some of those bad habits that a lot of sports bettors have, they don't have them. So yeah, starting with a fresh slate.
Yeah.
And something I'm like very intrigued about is, I mean, and you said you sort of have taken a step back in the business, but when you talk about your edge, thinking back to when you were probably potentially betting more, have there been moments where, how do you maintain your edge on the market? Have there been moments where you've thought your edge might be diminishing and you've had to change, or has it just been sort of small changes along the way just to stay in front? What's that been like?
Yeah, so in any business, like, it's always important to kind of stay on your toes and make sure that you're aware of any changes that are taking place in your industry, and just keeping up with how markets evolve over time, because I don't think everything stays the same. And I think if you do stay the same, and you can lose your edge. So it's important to kind of adapt and stay up with the changes. And you just see, like, I think one of the key things that we've seen in recent years is, like, with big regulated sports books coming into the picture, like big operators like DraftKings and FanDuel and these big operators coming into the United States marketplace, you start to realize that there's actually some things happening here that weren't happening before. Everyone was, there were less outs to bet into a few years back, 5 years back. And now with these operators coming in, people are getting access. I mean, not us necessarily, but other groups are getting access to these high limit accounts at DraftKings and FanDuel. And you're like, all right, maybe there is incentive to play with the market or manipulate the market in certain ways that weren't happening before these operators came into the space, right? Because if you can move a market in Pinnacle or other books that are kind of copying market makers for a few $100, and you can exponentially get down and bid in these new regulated books that are coming into the picture, you have incentive to kind of mess with the market in ways you wouldn't years back. So just being aware of things like that allow you to make sure that you're not falling into things that or the same patterns that you used to use back in the day to justify which way is the side of value. And now you just kind of have to adapt and learn with the new dynamics in the market.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, people in Australia here, certainly over the last decade, don't really know. We've had online betting for well over a decade now, so we haven't had to worry about things like that. But over in America, online gambling's only just started happening over the last 12 to 18 months. So you were probably having to, I mean, I know you're in Vegas, but a lot of people, you had to go into the casinos physically to place bets. People in Australia wouldn't even know what that's like, but you to get anything down, you were having to, physically walk in, weren't you?
Yeah, I mean, we had apps and stuff here in Vegas before, obviously the other places did, but it's still like, with these operators coming in, now you have just a plethora of apps all over the place, and there's so many different shops to bet at.
Yeah. Now you touched on this before. Sort of every pro bettor has their skill set. But what would you say is your most important skill that you have, and can you also touch on something that you think all pro sports bettors or even bettors that are, you know, trying to take that next step need to have?
Yeah, obviously, nobody's perfect, but if I were to say, you know, if I was to honestly assess where my skill sets are, just kind of taking feedback from my teammates and stuff, I'd probably say my strongest skill when it comes to trading markets is being able to process information fast and really come up with my opinion on which way I think a market's going to go, or what other bettors or other groups are trying to do in the space, and kind of be alert of that and try to identify the value as soon as possible. Because if you do that, you don't have to really rely on betting only $100 or $200 at a really soft sports book that is the last of the number after the market's completely moved, right? If you can kind of process that information from what you're seeing in the market as soon as possible, instead of getting $100 or $200 down, now you have the ability to get thousands of dollars down or more if you know that, hey, this is the right side, because you're not waiting for the entire market to shift their odds before you are, okay, now I can finally make my bet and my decision. So I think experience plays a big role there, because as you see more markets and you put in the reps and see games over and over again, you kind of, it just kind of becomes like second nature, right? It becomes like breathing. You understand what you're looking at, and you understand that what you've been doing over the past 5, 6 years, 7 years has worked, right? Because it's not only produced results, but you can measure it by getting good line value at the start of a match too.
Something that I want to bring something up here, and it's, you know, from Tip Titans perspective and the way our Titans deliver tips, and you're included in this, you always send a staking plan with your tips. But like, and you don't have to answer this, you don't want to, but from a personal standpoint, when you know you've got value on a tip, do you still follow a staking plan, or is it just, I know that this long term is a value bet, I want to get as much down as I can on it? Is that what sort of mindset do you have with that?
I guess you're always going to have kind of like the mindset that I'm going to try to get as much as I possibly can on whatever it is that you're targeting, simply because of the fact that you know that if something is of big value, right, the less likely it is going to stay in the market. So the objective is, if you can kind of accurately gauge what the fair price of a particular market should be, then your objective should be to just always get as much as possible, right? If you're overexposed for whatever reason, you could always buy back at more of a maybe neutral expected value price on the other side, because you know that if we don't take that side as a betting group, then someone else is going to. So our objective is always just to get as much as possible. But maybe when we're dealing with a different time in the market, maybe it's something more liquid, closer to the start of the match, where we can get heaps of money down if we wanted to. Maybe the strategy kind of changes there, and we're a little bit more strategic on how much we want to place on something, given our expected edge, right? So the bigger our edge, the bigger we should be betting. Those are just simple fundamentals based on the concepts of Kelly criterion, which, you know, people listening to this can kind of Google and understand what that is. But essentially what the gist of that is that anytime your perceived edge is bigger, you should be, you know, be betting more on stuff, because as your edge, right, as your edge increases, your variance is also going to decrease on something, because you're going to be paid far more for that bet when it does win, because the fair odds should be completely, you know, different than what you're betting. So yeah, to answer your question in short, anytime that we feel like we have a bigger edge on something, the objective is to bet higher than we do on the stuff that doesn't have as big of an edge.
Yeah, for sure. And sort of staying on that train of thought there, what are sort of the biggest challenges from a mental standpoint, you know, that you perceive being a professional bettor? You know, they might have changed over your journey, and if you could sort of think back to developing those mental skills. But yeah, what's the biggest part of the mental game for you?
Well, you always want to make sure that you're staying neutral, right? Mentally, like you don't want to get too high when things are going great, and you don't want to get too low when things are going bad, because you know, after that match is done, you're on to the next, and maybe you're betting multiple things at once, and multiple games are kind of happening all at once, and you just don't want to get attached to results or how the scores are going, because one, they're mental distractions, and two, they can kind of take away from you emotionally too. And if you let emotions get involved, you're kind of going to put yourself in a position where your performance is going to take a decline. So to mentally stay sharp, I think that's one of those things that come from experience, right? Because you need to see a little bit of adversity, right? You need to see that sometimes you can lose, but it's okay, because you've been doing this long enough to know that even during your dips, you're always going to kind of come through in the end if you just stick to the course and stick to the plan. And that's okay. I understand there's some vulnerabilities in all of us, and we this is the kind of the business that we've chosen to work in the gambling industry. So I've always told myself, like, if I can't really stomach these losses and I can't be mentally straight, then it's better to either do it at a smaller scale where it kind of just fits that category of entertainment and recreation, as opposed to doing this for a profession. But I think just even working in like a team environment, even if you're new to betting, right? Let's say you're not really running like a full-blown operation, just, you know, find someone that you can kind of bounce bets off of and talk about things, because I think being alone in this space can kind of, when things are kind of not going so good, can put you kind of in a dark place, right? Because you have these thoughts like, oh, what am I doing? Am I doing something wrong? Should I be changing my approach? And most of the time, if you've kind of already applied yourself the correct way when you've been betting, then the answer is going to be no. You don't really need to change anything or do things differently. You just need to kind of train yourself to kind of be neutral mentally. And I think that having even the simplest thing of having good people around you who can kind of keep you in check and make sure that you don't get too high or too low based on results will help you stay sharp mentally.
Yeah, for sure. Something that we try and preach here is like detaching yourself from the tip to tip, day to day, week to week, even month to month. And it sort of comes back to what you were saying as well, where it's if you can get to a point where you're thinking less about the result of the bet and more about whether the bet was a good bet to place, and you can detach yourself emotionally from it. It's almost like a blissful state, isn't it? Where I mean, do you watch the games you bet on, or do you try not to do that, or is it from an entertainment perspective, or?
I mean, yeah, as like the day is dying out, right? You have a few positions left. You're like, all right, let me throw this on. But like in the heart of busy season, like a busy Saturday where it's like a bunch of football going on, you have college basketball, NBA, all this stuff. I mean, it's impossible, right, to watch everything. And then and then while we're actively betting, we don't want to be distracted by what's going on in the game, because it's no different than like being in a regular job and being on your cell phone, right? So we just want to make sure that we're being honest with ourselves and treating, you know, when we are treating ourselves like an important piece to the business, and focusing on performance as opposed to just kind of getting that thrill and that entertainment out of the match, unless we're obviously in a position where we can kind of know that, hey, the day is kind of coming to an end and we can maybe throw a game on or two and enjoy how the rest of the day is going to play out.
Sure. And like, I know a lot of people bet for entertainment, so they obviously want to place the bet and watch the game that they're betting on. But there's potentially something to think about, isn't it? If you are finding yourself too caught up in the result of the bet or the game, maybe it's something that to if you're really wanting to take that next step, maybe you stop watching the games and place your bets and walk away, kind of thing. That could be something to try.
Yeah, and I think that, you know, one thing that we train ourselves to, even our traders, to kind of think is that we believe that the profits are always made, right, when you place the bet, and not when the bet is kind of simulated and it's either won or lost. And I know people are like, oh, if you lose, how do you win when a place is bet? Well, going back to the expected value concept, whenever you bet for value, right, you're making essentially a bit of margin on what the fair line should be. And I think that to help, even beginner bettors understand this, is that if your bet actually like wasn't good, right? Kind of use like realistic thoughts to analyze that. If you can say, hey, I bet, I don't know, 2.2 on a market that ended up closing 1.9, it's a no-brainer. You know that you got it in good. There's no subjectivity to think about there. Why? Because if you really wanted to, you could have bet the opposite side at 1.9 as well and just locked in a profit. So to just kind of summarize that, like ask yourself, like, what was the landscape of the market when I did place that bet? And if you can kind of answer and justify those things by saying, hey, I got a really good price, and it was an opportunity for arbitrage if I wanted to buy the other side, those are metrics to kind of justify the value in your bet.
Yeah, absolutely. And sort of staying again, something that it's a bit of an elephant in the room in this industry, but downswings, they're inevitable. No matter how good you are, you're going to experience a downswing at some point. How do you personally deal with your downswings, and what advice can you offer other bettors who are going through them?
Yeah, so when we go through downswings as a business, the most important thing that we can do is make sure that we're kind of, like I said, analyzing using the concepts that I told you. Make sure that the stuff that we're playing actually does have value. If there's anywhere we can adjust, we will. But we also have to be honest with ourselves and not overfit our answers, right? Because if we get bias involved and say, hey, just because this bet lost, we're going to actually just try to look at how this bet was wrong, right? Instead of looking how it was right. So we always want to be neutral instead of taking losers and saying, oh, this bet was bad because it lost. Like, how can we take a loser and still justify that bet was good? And then maybe even your winners, right? If your winners were bad bets, like, you don't want to justify the outcome that, okay, this bet won, but I ended up betting, I don't know, 1.9 odds and the market closed at 2.1, but it doesn't matter because the bet still won. You're not really assessing things fairly. So assessing is one step, and then two is adjusting. So like if you're going through a downswing, right, your bankroll is also going to be slightly coming down. I mean, whether it's by a few percentage points, 10%, I don't know how bad of a day of the week you might have. But it can always vary, and just kind of adjusting your bankroll to make sure that you can always, I mean, not adjusting your bankroll, but taking your new bankroll and adjusting your bet sizing to make sure that you're staying within the appropriate risk size per bet is important, so that you don't over bet based on your bankroll. And that's what allows you to stay in the game, essentially, because if you do that, you can never go bust. You can never go bankrupt from your bankroll, right? If you start with a $10,000 bankroll, and let's just say a 1% bet, okay, is $100. All right, you lose a little bit here and there this week. Next week you're starting at 9,000. Instead of betting $100 per game, bet $90 a game. Just practices like that will allow you to stay good fundamentally and allow you to see how you can overcome that downswing. Because if you're betting good and you're learning from other pros, reading stuff, staying up to date with good information, and you're placing good bets and you can justify that, it's inevitable. You're eventually going to go on an upswing. You're going to win. And when you did have to sacrifice and resize your bet sizing, you're going to have that opportunity to see your bankroll grow and then increase your bet sizing at some point. So don't rush, right? Because there's no sprint, and there's no sprint to kind of get to a specific bankroll at any given time. Variance doesn't really care about what you bet. It's just a natural part of this business. And when the time comes and you see, all right, I'm making progress, my bankroll's growing, then you can start betting more on games.
For sure. That's very good bankroll management advice there. It's something that we try to preach here as well. It's just about staying in the game, isn't it? Just blowing up your bankroll is the worst thing you can do. It's just about staying in the game.
That's right.
Now I've listened to a lot of pro bettors over the years, and even, you know, investors from other industries as well. And a lot of them talk about a time where they lost it all. You know, it was like we were just speaking about, they, you know, made the ultimate mistake. Is there a time you can recall where you sort of had a loss where you weren't sure you could sort of bounce back from, and if there was, can you talk about what the steps you put in place to rebound to how you got to where you are today?
Yeah, I think most of that kind of came early on, but like the risk of ruin to kind of losing, 10,000 is a lot different than losing a couple million. So I think that learning from those mistakes with a smaller bankroll allowed us to kind of not fall into those, that same situation as we scaled our business and got up there. So I'd really say that if you are going to kind of make mistakes now, embrace them, accept them for what they are, right? And kind of learn from them early and make sure you adapt to what needs to be done in order to avoid that pitfall again. I'm fortunate that I haven't been in that position. I'd probably say that a lot of that is thanks to working in a team environment. Like I said, if things are going bad, sometimes it can put you in a dark place when you're by yourself. So if you have a team, right, regardless of if I'm the owner or an employee of my business, I am either running a position for my employers, or I'm running a business for my employees to take home a paycheck and support their families or their lives. So I'm accountable to make sure that it's an important thing for me, right? I'm motivated to make sure that my employees not only have a job, but they have an opportunity to scale in our business too. So having some sense of accountability is always going to help you from going bust. So whatever you feel that you can do in this business to kind of detach yourself emotionally and have something to keep you in check when things are going bad, I think is a necessity for this business. The reason why I say that is because it's inevitable. You're going to go through a downswing, and everybody handles it differently. But you can always feel a sense of, I have to be this way, and I got to make sure I stay in line, because I don't want my business partner to judge me, or I don't want my employees to think I'm some crazy maniac. Not that I fit that profile anyways, but I'm just kind of putting it into perspective.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Now, something that I know underpins your strategy, and you're really strong on this, is the importance of price. Now, I know a lot of recreational bettors aren't price sensitive. A lot of them probably only have one book and they just bet at that one book, and that's obviously another topic. But I know you literally will bet to the cent, and if a bet has gone a cent past your price, you won't bet. So can you elaborate a little bit more about that, of how important price is in sports betting markets, and how staking may change based on that price movement, or how a market's moving?
Yeah, it's important to kind of make sure that you set a target price and you don't fall below that. Why? Because every cent counts, right? Even if maybe 1 cent less than what you said you were going to bet might still be a profitable number. One thing's certain, you're not going to make as much money betting that 2.3 as you would betting 2.29. So no matter what, even if you feel like that particular, 1 cent here might still have value, if you keep doing that in every spot, next thing you know, 1 cent turns into 2 cents or 3 cents or 4 cents, and now you're just going way below what you should be betting. So I think it's just a good practice, right, to just stay disciplined to that number, regardless of if you think that 1 cent better is okay. Maybe sure, maybe in certain spots that's okay, if you use it to your discretion. However, I think that the reason, even in the tipping industry, right? Like you as a tipper might say, okay, bet this at 2.4. It's available at Pinnacle, and you can go down to 2.35. Someone gets on 2-3 hours later, price is 2.25, and they're like, oh, like I can't make any money, and then they kind of want to, drop a subscription or say or blame it on the tipper. But the reality of it is that the person betting at 2.4 when something's just released is different than the person who's going to bet it at 2.25, right? Because it's a night and day difference in profitability long term. What you bet at 2.4 can make money, but the person betting that at 2.25 can slightly be losing money long term if the fair odds of that should be, I don't know, 2.3, let's just say.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things where, yes, I do make certain decisions sometimes where, okay, 1 cent is fine. But I think if it's not your information, right? Like if I post a tennis play on a website and it's not your information, you can't always assume that, all right, it's okay to play 1 cent worse than here. Because if that was the case, I would have just put, okay, good to 2.29 instead of 2.3. So it's, yes, you might not lose money betting at 1 cent less, but just for the sake of developing discipline, I think it's important to at least make sure that you're sticking to the numbers.
Yeah, at the very least, it's a discipline exercise, isn't it? It's like, are you able to not place that bet even though you want to be on that side, but the price is wrong? That's just one of the fundamentals as well.
Right.
Now, in the US, there's a term called steaming. I hear it a fair bit. Can you tell us, firstly, for the benefit of the audience, what is steaming, and how do you leverage it to create a positive long-term position?
Yeah, so steaming is basically, when an entire market is moving on a price for a particular match. So I don't know, let's say Pinnacle and a few other market making books like SingBet or BetCris, they start moving, right? It starts creating steam in the marketplace. And steam is basically where every other operator in the industry will kind of follow suit. If they see, they're dropping at these market making books, they'll also try to drop their prices to make sure it stays in line where the rest of the market is at. So when you're first starting out, right, you are only betting a couple $100 or whatever it is. I think kind of following that market movement and betting at the side that it's kind of progressing towards is a very like an ABC strategy to kind of build a portfolio of value bets. And that's kind of how me and my partner started in this business before we kind of are at the scale we are now. And I think that it's a good way, a good systematic way of not having to really guess so much on what you should be betting. It's a good place to start. If you don't, like, it's a good graduation from like arbitrage betting, because arbitrage betting is like looking at a market and being like, all right, I'm going to bet 2.1 here and I'm going to bet 1.96 there, and you have an arbitrage bet. But with this concept, you don't have to bet both sides. You just kind of follow the side of the momentum, right? You don't want to bet against the momentum, because if you bet against the momentum, that's very likely a bet that hasn't reached its price maturity yet. So like if you bet the wrong side at like 2.1 and the momentum is shifting the other way, that bet's probably not going to be good more often than not, because if the momentum's going the other way, you could have probably gotten like 2.2 or 2.25, 2.3, depending on how far the market shifts. So that's the problem with arbitrage betting, is that, yeah, you lock in guaranteed profit, right? But what you're also doing is you're betting the second side that's most likely doesn't have any value. And if you when you do that, when you bet the side that doesn't have value, you're essentially giving money back to the bookmaker. Yes, you're locking in a profit, but that doesn't do you any good, because if you're giving money back to the bookmakers, you're also hindering your growth. So even though arbitrage betting could guarantee profit, and I know it's the right fit for certain people at a certain time, but when you're ready to take it to the next step, I think kind of following that steam is a good way to kind of graduate away from arbitrage betting and just bet the right side. If you follow the momentum and see where the odds are kind of shifting as fast as possible, you can pick up a really good price on the right side.
Yeah, it's probably important to note as well there, though, that it obviously gets to a point where the bet's no longer value. It might be the right side, but it's not a value bet anymore, is it? You know, if it's coming from, you know, $2.30 into $1.90 or something like that, it might not be value at $1.90, is it? It is. You got to be careful. You got to still be taking the right price.
Absolutely.
Now, getting set is a problem all bettors are facing these days. You know, unless you're you know, not a smart bettor. It's not even just pros these days that are struggling to get down. It's semi-pros and anyone with half a clue. Do you use exclusively bookmakers within the US, or do you use international bookmakers as well? And have you used peer-to-peer exchanges like Betfair? Is that part of your strategy too?
Not so much. We try to stay like compliant. We try to make sure that we're playing within the rules based on our jurisdiction. So we'll just use everything to our advantage without really breaking any rules. So yeah, we do have some stuff here in the US that other parts of the world don't have. We have access to some sports books that are international level, and they have larger liquidity, and we obviously bet into them whenever we can. But when we talk about like getting set, you just want to have as much resources as you possibly can, because the more resources you have, you can use them for different scenarios, right? Like one bookmaker might not be good for a particular sport, but the other bookmaker might be good for that. So there are certain places I can't bet tennis, and there are certain places I can, and then vice versa with other sports. And I think getting set is just kind of expanding your set of resources and making yourself available to capture different things at different times.
And are there any strategies that and again, you don't have to give away your secrets, but are there any strategies you use that result in higher limits from bookmakers? And in that same breath, can you sort of talk about you know, how relationships work with bookmakers and sharp clients in the US particularly?
Yeah, so I think that sometimes, right, when you open up a new account, like just on the way some sportsbooks profile you, just for losing and just losing only, you'll naturally get higher limits in some places just because you lost, even if the bets were good. So I guess it really boils down to on what kind of a rating system these sportsbooks use, and we try our best, right, to understand what's going on behind the scenes with different operators to see what we can do to kind of play that cat and mouse game and get them into giving us, or at least getting us close to the limits we want. And we kind of want to make ourselves look likable to the eyes of the operators. So for different sportsbooks, that's going to be different. How one sportsbook profiles you is completely different than the other. And to be honest, I don't even know all the answers up to this day, because it's so hard to kind of pinpoint a specific pattern. Like you think one thing's working one day and then the next thing it's not. So you always just got to try for yourself and see what kind of opinion you form for yourself. And if you find an edge or an angle that can give you better limits in a particular sports book, then you're doing something right.
Yeah. And just on that as well, what do you think about the current like landscape, like the current bookmaking landscape, not just bookmaking, but just the general betting landscape. Like you sort of touched on it about some books will give you bigger limits if they profile you to be a losing bettor. You know, how do you feel about the current landscape being able to, you know, what bookies are able to do is sort of what I'm getting at.
I don't know. Like the landscape's always changing. I'm still kind of bullish on the overall market as a whole. I do think that we're gonna see a lot of changes still happen over the next decade. I don't know what they're necessarily going to be, but we're going to find out.
All right, Harout, that's sort of all I had for you. Thanks for your time today. Did you want to add anything else yourself that you were sitting on?
I guess just one last takeaway, right? Some of the stuff that I want to say now is stuff that we've kind of already went through the podcast, but just to kind of summarize everything is just kind of stick things through, right? If you know, whether you're following a tipping service or you're trying to bet for yourself, whatever it is you're trying to do, this game is built on large sample sizes, it's built on long history. It doesn't happen overnight. So just kind of be patient with everything and make sure that you give something a fair amount of time before you truly say that it's not the right fit for you or it's not working out. And you'll see that if you do that, you'll see better results. You know, it's just like anything in life. You try to go to the gym for a few weeks and it's not enough time to change 10 years of bad habits. So yeah, it works the same way in sports. Be patient. If you're really passionate about it, let your competitive fire kind of drive you to success. But there's going to be some setbacks along the way, and you just got to be patient and be fair and give it time to kind of mature. Yeah,
for sure. I love that advice. Yeah, it's like you say, you can't change things overnight, and this is one of the toughest landscapes. Certainly as a profession out there, so it's important to keep your head down if you want to succeed in it. I wanted to say if listeners wanted to reach you, you're on socials, you're on Twitter, a bit like Harout. Is there anywhere else they can catch you?
That's primarily where I am. I'm on Instagram as well, but I don't spend much time there. If people want to engage or ask questions, my DMs are open on Twitter. Feel free to reach out, and I'm usually really good at trying to point people in the right direction if they have any questions or curious about anything. So yeah, you could reach out there, and happy to connect.
Brilliant. Awesome. Thanks, sir. I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, thanks a lot as well.
Cheers.